Hi, I'm Katrina Webb, founder of New Day and your podcast host. In each episode, we'll speak with ambitious leaders from around the world who are creating meaningful change and inspiring leadership for the greater good. Their stories will spark your own leadership journey and offer practical tools to help you lead with purpose and impact. So welcome to the New Day podcast. I'm Katrina Webb and my guest today is Shivani Gupta, who has spent over 30 years in corporate and business life, presented to more than 300,000 people across 19 countries, coached more than 1,500 leaders and authored 8 books. She's an engineer, an educator, and an entrepreneur, always bringing warmth, humour, and an unshakable belief that empowering people can shift the world. Today, we'll explore Shivani's personal journey, dive into her transformative models, and uncover practical steps you can take to bring them to life. Shivani, welcome to New Day podcast.
Thanks, Katrina. It's so good to see you.
Oh, look, it's wonderful to have you here. And Shivani, I'd love to talk about and go right back to the beginning, hear a little bit about your background, where you grew up and what's taken you on this journey to become an engineer, an educator, and now an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, I grew up in India for the first 11 years. And so when I moved to Australia, I guess the big why for me was to kind of make my parents proud. Indian families, often education, there's a lot of emphasis put on, which was very similar to my family. And like many kids who are 16, 17 years of age and don't really know what they want to do, I had no idea. I thought I'd become a lawyer because I used to watch a lot of law shows. And my father is an engineer, my grandfather is an engineer, and both those people have had and continue to have a lot of inspiration and impact on my life. And because I kind of didn't really know, I kind of fell into it. And so I ended up, studying engineering more out of inspiration rather than this deep-rooted interest or passion in it. And I'd like to think I was a fairly good engineer. I'm not sure I was a brilliant engineer, but I didn't love it. What I really loved was kind of humans and connection. And it's a really big contrast because, engineering is this black and white, very little grey, either you're right or wrong, into humans who are very non-black and white, and most of the stuff is grey. And, I think humans are complex. So I noticed that because my first job was looking after a bunch of tradies, and I thought, wow, like they're my dad's age. So how do I motivate them to work, seeing that I have zero experience coming straight from sort of engineering, university. And so that was a really interesting transition where I started to enjoy people relationships more. And I think from there, I had a great mentor, and he gave me 2 bits of advice, Katrina. The first one was, Shivani, I'm going to teach you how to drink a lot of beers. And I was like, okay. And the second one was, the first one was not so helpful. The second one he said is that you really want to do your MBA quicker. And I was thinking, God, I've just finished 4 years of uni. And at that stage, MBA is 4 years, pretty intense. But it was probably one of the best bits of advice and guidance that I've got from him. And I started my MBA straight away. And that really accelerated my career. So that felt that I was could apply for manufacturing, some mining, and a number of other organizations that I ended up working with. And I was able to then apply, I guess, some technical skills and some business skills, and really then in those roles worked on my leadership skills. And that sort of skyrocketed the career until it was time to let go of corporate land.
Let's explore that. When was a moment that you knew you had to let go of corporate land?
Sometimes it felt daily. Sometimes there was just meetings that I would go into, and I often found myself, if I look back at that time, dragging myself out of bed. I remember thinking, like there was no energy, no zest in terms of what I actually did. I was also traveling a lot, which kind of covers and masks up some of the stuff that you really feel, because there's some excitement in traveling and picking up frequent flyer miles and having nice meals and eating at, fancy restaurants and drinking expensive wine. So I think some of that masked that feeling of uneasiness, feeling of not really wanting to do it. I was also in what I call now and look back upon in my life as a bit of a beige relationship. And so I just felt like it's kind of lived this very average beige life. Work was pretty beige, looked glamorous. The relationship was pretty beige, looked glamorous. And so for my transformational moment, came when I went overseas. It was just after September 11, and a lot of people had cancelled their trip. And I arrived in Nepal with like nobody else, and everybody else had cancelled their trip. And for the first time, coming from a very loud Indian family, I felt that there was lots of moments of silence because I was walking by myself. Secondly, I didn't speak Nepali. I spoke Hindi, but it was quite different. So often, even with my Sherpa and the guide and the cook, or people I met, I could do little exchanges. So I spent a lot of hours of each day for that month or so in silence. And so I would walk for hours. And, when you have a lot of silence, when you have a lot of spaces, I always say shit surfaces up. Stuff comes up that you go, I've been sort of burying this for a while, and now I need to either keep ignoring it and keep burying it, or I need to kind of address it. And so a lot of feelings started to come up, a lot of feeling of discomfort, no inspiration. And I thought, God, I'm only in my late 20s. What am I doing here? What do I really want to do? And I thought, God, I'd love to have work that I felt really excited about getting up. I'd love to have a relationship that I looked forward to coming home to each day. And so I knew kind of what came out of that trip was lots of kind of desired state, lots of what I love or I would want in my life, but I don't currently have. And, I interacted a lot with kids in Nepal, and they changed my life. I mean, I can tell you so many stories of being invited to a hut by this little boy where his mum, all they had to eat, there were six of them, and all they had to eat was some boiled rice and some salt and a little bit of water that the rice had been cooked in. But the mum didn't scold the boy, like she just divided up all the food equally and just made a plate for me. And I remember just sitting there crying, eating that food, as if that was yesterday, because I went, how can people that just have nothing just be so giving and have such big hearts and create what they're creating? And I feel so closed up, and most of the people in my life, don't operate this way. So the short of it is that when I came back from that trip, I resigned from my job, and I soon after resigned from my relationship. And neither of them were very easy decisions, but they were kind of, I knew very deep down from that trip that they had to be made. It was pretty scary, walking out of a relationship, having to sell a house, leaving a corporate job that paid a lot of money, and shares and travel. And I also had, no issues from the sense I had a really great, inspiring leader that I worked for. So to give all of that up for the unknown was pretty scary. And a lot of people I remember saying to me, do you know what you're doing? Including my parents. And I was like, not really. I don't quite know what I want to create, but I'm really clear on what I don't want. And sometimes, I mean, there's lots of analogies. I remember, people have shared analogies like, ships are not meant to sit in harbors. They're meant to be in deep oceans. But we have to let go sight of the shore before we can sail out to new ventures. And so it felt a bit like that. It felt like rather than just seeing what was comfortable, what was easy and known to the unknown and pretty scary, it was pretty hard, but I had to let go of what I had to kind of explore deeper things. And thank goodness I did, as scary as that was. Even though there was lots of moments of, oh my God, I've just completely stuffed up my life. I've completely blown it up. I remember thinking that many, many times. Still do occasionally. Think, oh my God, I've just blown up my life. But they were really quite scary times, but I knew that I had to do it. Yeah.
What were the next steps you took then, Shivani, you knew what you didn't want. What did you do next to find what you wanted?
Well, I thought very naively, Kat, that I thought that I could just kind of print off a few business cards, go to a few networking functions, and the work would just pour in, and it didn't. And I remember like banging my head on a desk a couple of days saying, I'm an idiot. I've just given up this massively paying role. So what I wasn't super clear on was knowing what I did want to do, which if anybody asked me now, I'm like, get a little bit clear before you kind of quit your job in terms of what you do. Learn from my mistakes. What kind of I fell into, and whether we call that, I don't know, universal divine timing, or whether that was just coincidence, I think more the former. But I had already been asked and nominated for the Telstra Business Women's Awards, and when I got to the interview, which was after I had resigned, To be honest, I thought they're going to go, well, she's resigned. And I think they were picking me as, a very young female executive at a pretty high level that are reached in leadership. So I told them all of that at the interview. I said, look, you're probably not going to pick me. I've just resigned. I'm trying to find who I am. I think I'm going to be doing blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I don't know what happened in that interview, but I won. And what happened as a result of winning the Telstra Business Women's Awards, which I had no idea, and a colleague had nominated me from BHP Billiton, which is a company I was working for at the time when I'd quit. So we rocked up to this lunch and I won. And what that opened up to was all these companies started to ask me to come and speak. And schools asked me to come and speak. And so I really had no idea that at that time would turn into something that I'm still doing 20 plus years later. I also had no idea that I was going to win after telling them the truth about leaving and going on a, self-discovery journey. So it wasn't kind of very structured for me. It was pretty organic. When I started speaking, I remember one particular company gave me $100 check at the time. And I was like, oh my God, somebody's going to pay me to speak. That's super weird. And then I kind of, joined Professional Speakers Australia, PSA. I then, joined David Grieg's course, which is kind of where I met you. Thank goodness for him in that course where we got to meet each other all those years ago. And then I started to then work on that art because I was getting these speaking engagements and I didn't really know how to show up or even prepare for it. So I thought it's probably something I've got to learn how to do. And that then led into some other work and led into some coaching and some training. And when I look at the core of those three things, which is, speaking, coaching, training / facilitation, the core of my business is still the same. Like I'm still doing those things. The topics may have evolved, the way that I learn may have evolved, but I think it's been a really interesting journey to then kind of fall into something and then hone the bits that you really want to work in and then let go of the bits that you don't really want to work in.
Yeah, wow, wonderful, fantastic advice, Shivani. And one of the things that you have worked heavily in and studied a lot about, and I can see why now, is maybe you were telling us that you were dispassionate about your corporate life and wanted to go into an area where you found more passion and work in an area that you loved and liked more. So you went around the world to investigate what is passion and how can you bring passion into your lives. Can you talk to us about the work you did and the models you've now created that have gone on to help thousands of people across the world through your lived expertise?
Yeah, thank you. I've always believed that you want to solve a problem that exists in the world, and whether it's in your family, in your city, in your state, in your country, or the world. And one of the things, knowing that I had great opportunities to work in the corporate sector, but I was not passionate about it, it kind of started me on that quest to go, well, how many people are passionate about it? And, whether you read the statistics from 20 years ago to today, unfortunately, they haven't changed significantly. And that is that most people, over 80% of people, are dispassionate about their work, according to the Gallup studies and a bunch of other research that exists. And I think that's a really big problem. I had that opportunity. I didn't have children, so I could go and start a business. I knew I had enough, money in the bank for about a year and a half. So if I didn't work, it wasn't the end of the world. I could then go and find another job. That was my big master plan, which is not really a big plan. But for a lot of people, they have mortgages, they have children, they want to do something that they desire, but they're not often able to. So I wanted to understand, how is it that we can really help people find either, little tiny bits of passion, but ideally, if almost everything that you could do is around your zones of genius, around your areas of passion, what a magnificent way to live. And so how do you kind of close that gap from not feeling very passionate at all, like I was, which so many people, over 80% of the world, feels, according to, number of research studies around there. So I started to, because I'm a kind of a self-confessed nerd, I wanted to then kind of study with some of the great masters, people that were very well known. I wanted to inhale some books because that's just how I do stuff. I wanted to study the different models, and I recognized that most people, even at job interviews, etc., when they arrive, they want the job and they will say that they're really passionate about all the values and, your why statements, but really every single human will operate out of their own set of passions. So one of the frameworks that I created was called the passion map, is the passion map. And that really is, you can call different, the 7 areas different things. And there's kind of 3 things that are really key in that passion map. The first is that you've got to get really clear about what you want to identify as your top 3 passions. Why top 3? Because trying to do all 7 areas means that you're mastering nothing. So what you feel like is that average Joe. You feel like me with that beige relationship, beige job, beige parenting, beige whatever. And you sit at this average. And I believe that you're better off mastering some things and choosing those areas consciously than you are kind of life leading you, which is unconsciously. And so I talk about, once I explain the model, I get people to pick their 3. And so you then go, and you don't have to pick them forever. I said just pick them for the next year, but don't pick them for the next week, because mastery takes time. The second part is, I always say to people that if you set goals, and most people set goals, but very few people I come across set passions. Your goals, when they're in alignment with your passions, your success rate goes way, way high. When your goals are not in alignment with your passions, they're the ones that you hit and miss all the time. And so I always say that if you're doing kind of a planning exercise, you always start off with your passions first, identify your top 3. Then you want to set a bunch of goals in your top 3. And I say 10 goals for each of your top passions. So you end up with like 30 goals just for your top 3. And then for number 4, 5, 6, you might have 3 or 4, and you might have 1 or 2 for number 6 and 7. So you end up with like somewhere between 35 and 50 goals for the year. But what you're doing, you're stacking up your top 3 passions. And the reason we want to stack that up is we want, you want to achieve those goals and you want to create mastery in those 3. So let's spend more of our time doing that. And part of that process also is that, working on your guilt, working on letting go of some of the things you're not going to be good at. When I say that, you're going to be pretty average at, or you might even suck at it. And you have to be prepared to be not so great at the others. And so just that third component is really working on that part of letting go so that you can create that. And, if something's been around for you for a long time, whether it's a year or a decade, start working on those areas and doing that. So that model has been super helpful to people because, again, people kind of try and do that sometimes bottom up. And yes, you can, but you get a bit stuck. When you actually kind of do a bit of both, you do a bit of a top down and a bottom up around. Top down is getting your passions clear. The bottom up is really getting your goals clear, and then kind of combining them. You start to also activate your head and heart together. You start to work on a bunch of different things, and then your life takes a different trajectory, I believe, because you've got really clear about what you want to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Shivani, are you happy to share maybe 1 or 2 of your top 3 passions? And also, how do you know that you're passionate about something? Like, how do you know they're in your top 3? What questions do you get people to maybe consider?
Yeah, well, one of the exercises I do is I get people to work out what their current state is. And the current state is, where do they spend most of their time and energy now? What do I mean by energy? Sometimes what consumes us energetically is not when we're doing that particular task or that activity, it's what we're thinking about. For example, sometimes you can be at work for a certain number of hours a day, but then you can be in the car or on the train home or whatever, and you're still thinking about things. That is still energy, and that is still time that you're giving to that particular area of passion. And often people always think passion is what you love. But I always say, well, actually discard that. Passion, your current passions are where you're spending your time and energy. You might not call that passion, but whether you like it or not, that's where your time and energy is going now. And then the second part of that process is to work out your desired state. It's really to kind of say, well, here I am today, but what would I like my stuff to be? And again, I say to people, don't try and change 6, 7 things at once. Try and change one thing at a time. I did a TED talk called Passion Without Discipline is Pointless. And, one of the things is passion sounds all heart, and I'm just going to, do what you're passionate about, leave your relationship if you're not passionate about it, leave your job. Well, that's all lovely, but it's not very practical. And so I'm a big one for saying, absolutely, you've got to let your heart lead it, but please don't let your heart lead it without no head in it. And so you want to make sure it's super practical. And that's why passion without discipline is pointless. So the discipline part of that is to really go, okay, what am I going to shift? What am I willing to sacrifice? How am I going to do it? So, for example, for me, my current top three passions are work.
Mhm.
And let me just start with that. That is a really hard thing as a female, as a mum, as a wife, particularly the ethnic culture I come from, to be able to say my work is my highest passion. And that is my desired and my current state. So that's not what I do, that's what I've chosen to do consciously. And, look, I get judged for that. There are people that go, oh, Shivani, you're so career minded, you blah, blah, blah. You'll always travel, you'll always do that. That's not true. My family is second, and I'll do anything for my family if they need me. But I feel a deeper calling to do my work. I'm the first woman in my lineage to work. And so I'm not sure whether it comes from that. I think partly it does. I think partly it just comes from, wanting to make a difference to people's lives. It's not really driven by money. Money is, of course, one of those seven areas of passion, but it's not in my top three. So I don't make the decisions based on money. But if it can have more impact, if it can leave people in a better place, like helping people discover who they are and helping them find what their desired state is and helping them move towards that so that they are living a life that's happier. They are living a life that feels more passionate. They living a life that feels more on purpose is something really, really important to me because I guess I experienced it the hard way, like most people do. My number two passion is my family, and that's also really difficult. I've communicated that with my family, not in a horrific sense, oh my God, you guys are too, but I'm very open about that, particularly with my kids being 16 and 15 now. My husband understands that. They understand that there are times that I am going to choose my work above them. And that doesn't mean I'm going to choose it always above them, but there are times that I'm going to choose work above them. And as they've got older, they don't need me as much physically, but they need me more psychologically for those conversations. And this afternoon, like I've got a date with my daughter. And so I'm going to pick her up from school and we're going to go out for a little banana bread and a iced chocolate, and we're going to hang out. We're going to talk about different things because I've got to travel tomorrow night. So, I think that I will always make and create spaces for my family. And I think about them a lot, but I am more obsessed with my work. And that's taken me a long time to say that. And I encourage people to say that if that is the case. Because I think a lot of this conversation that we've been talking about work-life balance and getting better at it, we've been talking about it for a couple of decades, maybe more, maybe 3 decades now. And I think the balance doesn't exist, right? So I don't talk about balance. I just talk about living according to your passions. If I'm at work, don't think about my kids. If I'm at home, don't think about my work. Compartmentalizing it, becoming more mindful of it, becoming aware of how you're showing up in those spaces is way more important than this thing called balance. Balance will come as a result of you living your passions. And my third passion is learning, which has been a passion for a long time. And I love learning. I want to sit and listen to other speakers. I listen to other podcasts. Next week there is an AI webinar. I think it's at 11 p.m. my time, which is way after my bedtime. But I've registered whether I stay up or not or watch the recording. I will make time to watch that 90-minute recording at some point. And so, is health in there? No. So that, does that mean health is bottom? No. Health has definitely come up higher as I've got older, but it's not in the top three. So then rather than watch everything I eat or worry about my, glass of red wine, I'm not as masterful about it than I am in my top three. And I don't feel so guilty about it that I used to. So, trying to practice what I preach there.
Shivani, thank you so much for sharing that. And I do want to say that working with you over many years, you're a New Day alumnus, and I've also experienced your passion map and your work in many of the programs that I've run because I love what you do and I see the impact of what you do in helping people to get clarity, but also permission, particularly for people and even myself, realizing that work is my number one passion as well. And I know as we're great friends, whenever we catch up, we go straight to work together because we're both passionate about work. We'll still talk about family and other things, but I know you and I can get caught in conversations for hours on work. And you've given me permission to own that and love that. Work really stimulates me, and it's something that's really important to me. And I've also seen the benefit and the ripple effect that you've had with many other people, particularly culturally around work and family, for different genders. That we think that some of us should be more passionate about family, and others should be passionate about work. But you've really created an environment where people can release guilt and have permission to do and spend time where they really like.
Yeah, thank you. And it means the world, if it's impacted you, Katrina, with all the amazing work you do to helping so many people yourself and thousands of people you help yourself. I think that's the beauty of our work, right? Because, sometimes you can be just working with one person, but the ripple effect of that person and that leader and what they do in their home and their business and their communities is kind of exponential. So I love that. I love that it's helped you. I love seeing some of the stuff that you're doing, with New Day, with now taking it to Nepal this year. And, I just think that's fantastic. And what you just said made me laugh because just that sort of 12, 13 minutes we had before we hit record today, what did we talk about? We were both talking about work. And well, I think there was a tiny bit of family, but we were just talking about work and how you're going and how you're managing. And we were talking about a week last week and week coming up. So that is so great. And it's so great also to be able to do that without the guilt, because I think so many people, cultures, but often women more than men, not to say that men don't either, but they really feel that. And when they hear me say that, I kind of see them sitting up in their chair. I see them asking questions. I see them lining up later and asking me questions. And I'll go, well, who would you be if you didn't feel guilty about that? And they often get a bit teary and they often go, I would be more aligned to who I am. I would be more living my purpose. I would more be showing my children who I am. I would more step into my own power. Like they say so many things around that. And I just think, that is so important to model it, but not just for the world. Like, when I sit down with my daughter, I was in the car the other day and she was at the front and she had three girlfriends in the back. And I was dropping them off into the city for doing karaoke. So they were all going to meet up with another three or four people that were taking the train in. And one of her girlfriends says to me, they said, oh, Shivani, I watched your TED Talk. I went, that's an interesting thing for a 16-year-old. And I went, oh, how did you come across it? Oh, Shanti sent it to us on the group chat. And we were chatting about it the other day because we all are interested and passionate about, on your passion map, very different things. Oh my God, I was like, I dropped them and I cried, Katrina, because I went, hey, here's my child who in that talk, I talk about work being my number one passion, and she's willing to share that with her friends. And B, these young women are going to think about that in terms of who they are and what they want to create. One of them lives with her brother and sister. Her parents live overseas. She's an overseas student. And I just listened to some of that, and it really excites me about also not only our current generation of you and my generation, but that next generation of people and young people, men and women and all genders, going, I want to live according to who I want to be and aspire to be rather than what is expected of me. I think that's super cool, super cool.
That is super cool. And that's huge, Shivani, for you as well, because I know you've shared with me, coming to Australia and the expectations maybe of our parents, but also there can be a problem in relationships, not just with parents, but with people that we love and live with and lead, that we can expect that they're going to have and share our same passions. And we've both talked about this with our parents, and sometimes it's been amazing. We've had shared, but there's also been some clashes. Can you talk to us about, when maybe passions do clash or we're putting our passions onto other people?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think when our passions clash with people we don't really get along that well with or really like that much or love that much, we go, whatever, we don't care. Often it becomes difficult when it is with people we love. For me, I've grown up in a family where my mum sacrificed everything for her family. Now, was that her desired state? If I was guessing, I'd say no. but that was an expected state, and that is what she chose to do. And so there was a little bit of that, particularly after we lost a baby before our daughter was born. There was a lot of expectation, well, kind of give up your speaking work, give up traveling so much. There's also an expectation that, from society, not just my parents or my mum particularly. So it took me a long time to understand why was it that my family, who was so into education then, when it comes to getting married and having children, want me to kind of be around more. Like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't align to getting highly educated. And it took me a long time to work out that for my mum, her work is her number 7 passion out of the map, which is the lowest. And so it's not that she doesn't love me, it's that she's coming from her passion list, which is very different to mine. I've had clashes with different people around money. Like, for example, for my husband, money is higher. It's not number 1, but it's higher than I am. And when I look at his history and his background, his parents went bankrupt when he was a teenager doing year 12. So he had to put himself through uni. It was difficult. So it's got a higher trigger point. It's got a higher button on it. And so I think as I've got older and I've played and spent more time in the model, teaching it, but also trying to practice it in my own life, one of the things I've noticed is that each person has their own background and history and trauma and trigger points around stuff. And so rather than judge it, if I can come from a place of trying to understand it, if I can come from a place of trying to respect it, even if it's not alignment to how I live or want to live, then that's kind of part of growing up. And that's part of my spiritual growth also, is to be able to go, okay, their passions are what they are. And so rather than go, oh my God, your passions need to be the same as mine, because, they're, and I was also then very cognizant of the fact that I didn't want to pass that feeling of my passions of work to be the number 1 passion to my children. So, either they'll make it number 1 or they do the complete opposite, Kat, in the future. But I also wanted to be transparent with them to say, well, you pick what you want to pick. So I kind of needed to honor the people in my life that I love, that when there are clashes, that when we come from a place of judgment, it becomes very difficult to communicate with those people. So the people that you really love, you like, even in your workplaces, it's really easy to judge people. I mean, I've hired a bunch of staff in my different businesses, and I think initially I was very judgmental of people. If they didn't have work as their number 1 passion, well, you're not worth hiring. Like, you're useless to me. Now, I wouldn't say that out loud, but I certainly thought it in my head. And I was like, well, you're out, you're out. And I noticed that I would sometimes say no to some fantastic people with fantastic CVs and experience. So I kind of had to learn over time to say, well, how do I feed your passions? And how do you feed mine? So, for example, that particular passion map I now use in all my interviews, so I have done for quite a few years. And I say to people, I'm not expecting work to be your number 1, but it's my number 1. Tell me what your top 3 are. Take a minute to assess it. Talk to me about what yours are. How can I feed yours? How do you feed mine? And that conversation becomes great. When I have that conversation with my children, who now have very different passions to me, social is pretty high for both of them. Well, for my daughter, that's in her top 3. Social is not that high for me. And so I need to be able to feed that passion for her. I need to be able to let her feel comfortable sharing her passions without judgment and going, great, how do I feed that? Well, I'd love to be able to have a few friends around. I'd love to be able to, go and do that. I'd love for you to be able to meet that. And I'd rather stay close to her and my son and my husband and my parents by trying to move out of that judgment. And do I still do it? Yeah, I still do it. Even despite having created the model. Am I doing it less? Yes, I'm doing it less. But, there is still lots of work as a human to do on just trying to stay out of people's judgment and really, really listening to them when they speak about what they're passionate about, and really tuning in to what it is that they want and desire, and give them that, and give them that. Because when I really tune into people's passions, whether they're people in my family who I love dearly, or my friends, or the people I hire, or even people that I meet at an event, people love being seen. People love feeling safe enough to share what their inner desires are, what their desired state is. And when I ask them that, they light up. And if I can not judge it, which they can sense in my body language, if I can hold that space for them and ask them and be curious and wonder and open my heart and my mind to that, they blossom. And that kind of is, what I'm trying to take into my work.
Mhm.
And I do clash at times with people, whether it's a volunteer board or different things. I clash with people in my family at times, clash with people in my friendships at times. But I'm trying to work on that. And I always say to people, if you could do more work on that and
Mhm.
continue to hold space for people, it's extraordinary witnessing what happens. Extraordinary.
Yeah, wow, that is so powerful, Shivani. So powerful. Your latest book, Getting Your People to Step Up, I can see that this is what you're talking about, even with that model, is that process of helping people, but through you understanding what they're passionate about, that's going to help them step up. What other things did you find out when you did some research for the book about what you can do to help people to step up in the workplace?
Yeah, so the Passion Map's chapter 2, and that's dedicated to bringing it into interviews and how you tap into people's passions. I also, it seemed really basic that vision came up a lot, and that people often work for a leader or an entrepreneur that they've got this grandiose vision and the vision statement's on the wall and it's on your website and it's on all these different places. But people sometimes really find it difficult to relate to their little piece of work that fits into something bigger. And, for example, I start the book off talking about that there is a row of masonry workers. And you sort of went up to the first person and you said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Look, it's hot and dusty and the conditions are pretty bad, but I have a wife, I have children, I have food to put on the table. And so I'm carving on this piece of stone and I've got a few more to do. And then I'll get some money and I'll be able to put food on the table." And, this guy walks up a little bit further and he says to the guy, and he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a cathedral." And, the second guy could see that their piece of work fitted into that section, into that wall, into that room, into the whatever, 7-level cathedral or temple or whatever it is what you're building. They could see that their contribution contributed to the bigger vision. But most people can't see that. So when we want our people to step up, we need to constantly engage them in their vision, in the bigger vision, but we constantly need to reinforce that the piece of work that they're doing matters. And they need to be really clear about what they've got to deliver on to be able to do that. Obviously we can talk about this for a while, but maybe one of the other things that I wanted to mention is that a lot of managers and leaders, their space and time gets occupied by non-performing, noisy, dispassionate employees. And they then wonder, why bother? They get home and they go, "Oh, more complaining, more whinging. My boss is crunching me and asking me to do this. I feel that from my people." And they feel the crunch off of managers and leaders at that level from both directions. And I talk about the fact that we've got to flip that on its head. That I believe that if you want to really get people to step up, the people that we look after the first are our passionate employees. I posted a quote yesterday on LinkedIn, and the quote, which is not my quote, but the quote says, "As leaders, when we notice our passionate employees get quiet, we should get worried," right? Because our passionate employees are the ones that will put their hands up, will take on extra work, will emulate you as a leader, will become an advocate for within their teams to get them to do. They're positive, they're optimistic, they look at things, and they're your ideal people that carry out your work and what you're trying to do. But when they become quiet, they're starting to disengage. So I think one of the ways to get your people to step up for managers and leaders is to spend more time with the passionate people. And the reason we don't is because they're not noisy, they don't ask for anything. And really flipping that thinking on its head and spending more time with them and spending less time there. That's all the research shows. I've got a whole chapter devoted on that. And mapping out what people you can skill and train, and mapping out people that you're looking for passion and attitude, and how to invest in those sort of people more.
Yeah, well, we can see your books. For people watching this, you can see your 8 books and more behind you. But if people want to find out more, Shivani, they can go to your website and get to read many books or your blogs. Or you also have a podcast, and congratulations, you've just recently gone over 200 episodes.
Yeah, look, I never, Kat, thought that that would happen. And in fact, I was getting a facial this morning, and this beautiful young woman that does my facial, she said to me, she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually on a podcast today with a friend of mine, Katrina." And she said, "Oh, and have you thought about ever starting a podcast?" And I said, "I have one." So she got really excited about that, and she asked me why I started. And to be honest, I had no intention of starting a podcast. But I have a dear friend of mine, Jill, who kept asking and asking and asking and asking me to start a podcast, which I couldn't see the why. And she then unfortunately got very ill, and she was given a year to live. And so my first podcast is her when she went into palliative care, and she had about a week to live. And the podcast is called A Year to Live, which was the first time. And so sometimes I must admit I still don't know why I do it. But when I hit 200, it's a homage to her. It's a thank you to her, and it's a promise to her that I made that I would continue to do them, even in weeks that were mad, with guests that were amazing. And you've been on it, so thank you. And yeah, and continue that work wherever it goes, wherever it leads, is just, yeah, continuing. And that's how episode 200 started the other day, is a homage and a thank you to Jill. So she is now in another planet and another world, but very grateful to what she inspired me to do.
We'll make sure we put a link to your podcast in our show notes, Shivani. I'd love to talk a little bit more about Jill because she's had a huge impact on some decisions that you made in your life that have you sitting in that room that you are in today. Can you share a bit more about the inspiration that she gave you to make some significant changes for you to be even more passionate and live where you want to live?
Yes, I'll try and do that without completely losing it here. When Jill shared with me that she had just found out she got stage 4 ovarian cancer, it was kind of on the day that I set my passions and goals each year, which is at the beginning of the year. And she said that nothing more could be done, right? So she had been given a year, and she had to kind of make the most of it. And in a conversation with me, she asked me if I had a year to live, what would I do? Which had me in tears, because the first people I thought about is my kids and my husband. And I thought, well, even if I had to sell everything, live on kind of the cash, that's what I would do. But if I had a little bit more time, I would move cities, because I never felt like my previous city was my home. It was a beautiful city and still have amazing clients and connections there, but I just didn't feel like it was home for me. And belonging is really important to me, partly because of the culture I grew up in, the family I grew up in, and so finding home. And I've always really loved Brisbane, which is what I'm based. And after that conversation, it was 8 days later after that conversation, because I said to my husband, Scott, I don't think this is a coincidence. This is not a coincidence that this conversation's been had. I've been doing this process for 20 years, right? And we're just getting back from Brisbane. Like, this is not a coincidence. So I think that those moments in life are everywhere. And I think that if we get a bit quiet and we really tune in, that's where the magic is. I could have done different things in Nepal. But I think because I had spaces to be quiet and I could notice small things. And I think in that noticing, in those moments with that beautiful boy, in those moments with the family that brought me in those moments with interacting with my Sherpa and my guide and my cook, laughing about really little things, and in the noticing of watching the stars in silence at each night, camping, that's where the transformational work happens. And so I think for me, what Jill inspired me to do was to accelerate what I'd already been feeling. I'd already been feeling for quite a while that this wasn't right. I'd expressed this frustration. I was doing the work I love generally, but I'd also bought another business. I was trying to scale that business, which I wasn't loving, even though it was, super successful. And I was caught in this, I don't know whether it was keeping up with the Jones, what it was, but I was just this kind of this dissatisfaction happening again. And it was almost, leading up to that 20 years from coming from Nepal. And I felt agitated at a level. And I think what Jill did for me was she acted as that North Star. She acted as that person that was that boy in Nepal. She acted as a, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do now? Right? You've now created a very successful life again. And what do you really want to do? And what I really wanted to do was move to Brisbane. What I really wanted to do was to give my children better opportunities. What I wanted to do was give my husband better opportunities. I can kind of work out of anywhere. What I wanted to do was not be in that wellness business all the time, deep down. What I wanted to do was eventually be able to exit out of that, which I felt at times was making me unwell, even though it was a wellness business, which is quite ironic. What I wanted to do was be closer to Byron, where I really feel is kind of my soul home, and I want to spend more and more time as I get older there. But I was comfortable, right? I was, lived close to the beach. Scott had his work, I had my businesses, kids were in a good school. And it kind of felt like a recreation of where I was, pre starting up my own business. But this time I had a husband and kids and blah, 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 blah. And so I think what Jill did for me was to say, are you really happy? Are you really passionate? Do you really need to kind of fine tune and relook at your life again? And the answer was yes, that's what I needed. So I think her journey, and a very sad ending to a beautiful, amazing human who did pass away that year, was to do more of what I loved. I got very clear when I moved, even though it took me another couple of years to exit that business, I got very clear that I would work on that business, scale it faster, and exit it. I got very clear that I wanted to create something more and more and more in Byron and spend more time there in the long run. I got very clear that I was going to give my kids better opportunities, right? And so she did so many things. And did she mean for that ripple effect to have that impact that it is even now, like whether it's an episode or other things? Maybe. She was a pretty wise woman, but it certainly has had. She's had the same impact on me as that boy in Nepal 20 plus years ago. And I wouldn't be, as you said, Kat, I wouldn't be sitting in this room in Brisbane doing this podcast with you. I wouldn't be doing this podcast and a day today, picking up my daughter and having a date with her. And I'm, refining more and more of living, because the best way to teach people is for me to live it, right? There's no point teaching it if I'm not living it. Do I live it every day? No. Do I get it wrong every day? Oh my God, yes. Do I get it wrong with my children? Yes. Do I get it wrong with my husband? All the time. Do I get judgy? Yes, I do. But, constantly seeing if I can kind of come back to that, come back to who I am is been amazing. And yeah, I, particularly after exiting the wellness business, and starting to work on my wellness again, it's been great. And recently I had health scare, and even that fine tunes it and brings it home, because you start to go, okay, right, this is not somebody else. This is not Jill we're talking about who had a year. This is not somebody else who's got 5 years. There was that moment of about 2 weeks waiting for some results where I felt really aware of who I was and what I was doing. And I think that's now sparked another level of work I really need to do. I don't know how to do it, but I really need to do it. And, that work is to eliminate sexual abuse of children. I was abused as a child between the ages of 6 and 11, and that has taken a lot of work to talk about it. That's taken a lot of therapy to get clear about it. And I have no idea where to start. Like, I've been sponsoring girls, I've been taking trips to India in the past. I have no idea how to work on it. Pre, post, I don't know. I don't have the answers. But what I do know from my health scare is that it's really got me in tune with, I'm not going to wait till my kids have finished school. I'm not going to wait till I've paid off my mortgage. So I'm going to accelerate that from my health scare. Don't know how to do it yet, but I will spend more time getting aligned on that.
Yeah. Wow, so much in that, Shivani. Thanks so much for sharing that and your own story. And just the legacy of Jill is still there and still working on people. And I've heard you talk about this a few times, and I love one of the things I love about you, it's probably your engineering mind, is you love to put numbers together and you encourage people wherever you are listening to you to think about how many weeks you could have left. That's if you live to the expected life age of your culture. But when we do that, it can be for people it can be scary, but for some people it can be incredibly awakening to go, what do I want to do and what am I waiting for?
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, I think with technology and AI and everything else coming in, our lifespan will increase. I'm not sure about the quality yet, but hopefully the quality of our life will increase. But currently in Australia, it's about 83 for women. And so I always say, and about 81 for men. So I just say, look, let's round it off to 80 and let's round off 52 weeks to 50. The accountants hate this numbers because I'm rounding everything down, but it's about 4,000 weeks. And I have X's on my whiteboard behind me with how many weeks I've got left, Kat. And so today an X will come off because it's a Friday and I do it Saturday to Friday and another X is gone. And so, I would encourage you to have a visual around how many weeks you've got left. Make each week count. If you don't love the work you're doing, slowly begin to shift it. If you're in a relationship that needs work, slowly begin to work on it. There's no fast, 3 steps here and you're going to live this amazing, passionate life. It's a bit like a muscle. It's a bit like exercising, eating, like you've got to incorporate that into what you do. But, when people say, I can't wait to get to the end of that week, I'm going, let me stop you there, right? This is another week gone. So maybe don't think like that. Maybe do stuff that's meaningful on a week to week basis and make each week count and work out how many weeks you've got left because that is morbid and it's meant to be morbid and it's not meant to depress you, but it's meant to hopefully enlighten you to be able to go, what am I doing? Who am I spending time with that I need to let go? Who do I need to spend more time with that I'm not spending enough time with? What is my purpose? What is my passion? What do I want to be doing on a day-to-day basis? And, really start to kind of center yourself towards your North Star and towards your passions.
Wonderful. Shivani, your website is askshivani.com. And I also love that you love coming up with models. So for that word ask, talk us through each letter of ask of, again, how we can inspire people today from listening to you to really think about, what they want to do with their weeks left from a place of inspiration.
Yeah, I wanted to create like a really simple framework. And I think the thing that people talked a lot about is kind of that acknowledgement, the seeking, the knowledge. And I've played with those words so many different ways, using the ask thing. But I think the whole point of the ask framework, Kat, is to kind of look within. So I always believe that your wisdom sits within you, right? Whether I'm speaking or coaching or training or doing whatever, I believe that people are generally, maybe not everyone, but most people are pretty wise. So the idea of that is to kind of self-reflect in terms of what is that wisdom that needs to be moved past. For example, a lot of people go, oh, I love data. Well, data is useless unless you do something with it, right? Data, unless you plot it and unless you sort of can see a pattern in the data, that's when it becomes beautiful. Otherwise, they're just data points, they mean nothing. So, the whole thing about the ASK methodology, which I dive more into the TED talk and a couple of blogs if you want to have a look at it, and watch that for 5 or 6 minutes. But the whole purpose of that, of any framework, is to kind of self reflect a bit. And the reason I picked the brand of Ask Shivani was not only that you can ask me, but more that you can ask yourself. Ask yourself those questions to kind of work out who you are, what you want to do, and set your goal and like get in alignment with that. So I hope that kind of answers it overall.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, there's been so much wisdom in today's session and so much vulnerability, Shivani, and sharing of your story. I'd love to ask in finishing, and one question that's been sitting with me today is if you do have work as a number one passion, are you more at risk of burning out, do you think? That's my first question. And if that is a yes, what sort of things do you do to take care of your emotional, your mental, your physical, and your spiritual health so you can still enjoy life?
Yeah, great question. The first question is, yes, you will burn out if your number one passion is the same as your number two passion is the same as your number three passion. So the reason I say top three passions is that for me, it's not work, work, and work. It's work, family, learning. So when all my eggs are in one basket, so to speak, in work or whether it's my family, that's where you're going to burn out if it's work. You do need to have other passions. And so people that have, very few passions and work is their number one passions are more likely to burn out. Yes. So spreading those passions across the top three is really important. What do? I've got better as I've got older. So I have daily rituals. I have weekly rituals. I have monthly and I have yearly rituals. So a daily ritual, I do a 10-10-12. 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of journaling, and 12 minutes of meditation. That's the minimum. For me, that just sets my day. I do that when the whole house is asleep. I do that the first thing I wake up, it's next to my bed. I don't lay and do it, I sit up and do it. And that works for me. Weekly, I will usually have a conversation or a walk with a friend once a week. Once a month, I would see a coach or a spiritual teacher. And then, so what I tend to do is kind of take care of my mental and psychological stuff that way with some support. With physical stuff, I make sure I move for 30 minutes every day. I really dislike going to the gym, but I force myself to do it for osteoporosis longer term. But for me, it's also a connection with my daughter. So her and I go to the gym together 3 times a week. And it's about a 30-minute session. She'll come and hug me during the session. So it gives me the family connection as well as the physical connection. And then once a year, I also, once a month, I'll have a facial or a massage or something like that. And then once a year, I will take off by myself for usually a week or so. And so I have that built in around the family, school holidays, around my husband's work. And I don't mean travel for a board, or I don't mean travel for speaking. I mean travel, and it might be in Byron, it might be overseas, it might be wherever, but I take a week to myself. And I do a lot of self-nurturing. I do what I love. I have lots of pots of tea. I try not to do any computer work. I read a lot. I walk in nature a lot. But I notice that week for me is heaven. And it kind of resets me a lot for many, many months to come after that. So I kind of have self-imposed rituals that work for me and build into a little bit of friends, build into a bit of family. But a lot of it's kind of me managing me because I just rock up, as we could talk about, better versions of myself when I'm with my family and my work and my clients.
Beautiful. Shivani, when you go away and take that week to nurture yourself, do you think a part of that is nurturing your spirit? And I really wanted to bring this in the conversation as we start to come to an end, because a lot of people, when we use the term spirit or spirituality, people turn off or turn out because they don't think it's them, thinking that it's probably equal to religion. You coming from a place like India originally, how does spirit and spirituality fit into your life?
More and more, and I think a lot of people misinterpret the word spirit, right? We say we have spirited children. That doesn't mean that that just means that they're full on. And so I find spiritual work pretty full on because to me, it's just a reflection time. Some people run and they call that their spiritual health practice. It doesn't always have to be meditation, doesn't have to be on a mountaintop, doesn't have to be singing OMs, which is super weird because I have a son called Om. And so,
and Shanti, Om and Shanti, you got two kids.
Right. Don't get me started. That was my husband, definitely not me. I'm the Aussie out of the two of us. Even though he's Aussie, he's more Indian. But I think it's important when you look at the word spirit. Like, I mean, as I've got older, I've got back into yoga again. Yoga means it's the union, right? It's the union of your spirit and your body. So I think as I've got older, I'm also okay about saying that there is a higher will. I'm probably not religious, so I might not use the word God, but I might use the word spirit. I might use the word universe, probably is the word that I use a lot. And I think now that, people, even when they're science-based and they're into quantum physics and quantum mechanics and, whoever that they listen to, the fact that even if you want to look at it from a science lens and you look at it from an energy perspective, and you know that everything is energy, and we know that scientifically, we know that we're all connected, we know that everybody's moving at different frequencies. Whatever lens you want to look at it, I call it spirituality, you might call it quantum physics, some people might call it religion, some people might call it God, some people might call it Allah, some people might call it Shiva. You know, whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. The point is that for me, tuning in to my spirit, to my frequency, to my energies is a really important part of me being a better leader. And I believe that it makes me a better leader at home, and it definitely makes me a better leader outside of home. If I can do any of that, fantastic. And, you know, sometimes I meditate to clear my head. Sometimes I meditate. In fact, I meditated last night because I was so mad at my son last night. And so I meditated to send him love, and I meditated to calm down. So I use that. So you know, meditation is not always about, you know, sitting on a mountaintop and umming stuff, right? As I said, it's kind of helping you work on whatever aspect of your areas of passion and need it is. And I think when you can get to that part of it and take the judgment out of the word spirit or spirituality or religion, then it's magical, right? So when people sort of say, I don't use that word, I'm not really passionate about it, you know, sometimes volunteering at your kid's school is spirit, right? It's giving away that, and helping people or volunteering is spirit. So if you take the word out of it, but look at the meaning of it, that is way more important. And I say to people, just look at it with non-judgmental eyes and see how that relates to you, whether you want to do the science version, the spirit version, the God version, whatever version you want to do. Just find the meaning behind it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shivani. Gosh, you've given us so much to think about today. It's been an absolute delight to talk with you, with your warmth, your humour, your absolute intelligence and insights and lived experience and expertise. Thank you for, you know, doing an incredible amount of work on yourself, not only for your own healing, but I love the way that you're able to then find the science and the research and the models to then pay it forward and be of service through your spirit and your work to others. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Anytime.
Thanks for tuning in to the New Day podcast. For more inspiration and tools to lead for the greater good, visit newday.world. Keep leading with purpose, and we'll see you next time.